Today we're going to talk about AJAX, and we're also going to talk about jQuery. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to ramble for a few minutes just to kind of set the stage for what this is all going to look like. So we're going to start off by talking about what is AJAX and kind of sort of how it works and what you can do with it. From there, I'm going to get into the underlying gory details of how it really works in pure JavaScript. And then at the very end of the presentation, I'm going to show you how to carry out AJAX with jQuery. And now in reality, all you really need to know how to do is work with AJAX in using jQuery tools. That's a perfectly legitimate usage of jQuery. If generally you have to ask yourself, do I need jQuery to do what I'm doing? And if you're doing AJAX, you probably do. If you go looking for resources, probably almost all of what you'll find will be jQuery resources for it. So the majority of this presentation is just a broad overview of things that I don't need you to really be able to apply too much. Just working to build an understanding. And the examples are all going to be at the end. Now, I do think that the examples are probably the thing that you actually want. So I'm going to go through the first part of this pretty quickly, but hopefully I'll be able to frame those examples so they'll make a little bit of sense for you. The examples are going to be complicated because there's several of them. I'm not giving you the data files other than the exception of one file because the pages I'm creating are very simple and you could just create them on your own if you want to follow along. All right, so AJAX and a bit more AJAX. This is also something that we're going to use for more than 1 week. So this isn't exactly going to go away. It's not something that I think you're going to use on your final project probably because it's something that we're introducing in the middle of the term and you're not going to be able to build a project around it. We are going to do a lot of demonstrations with it as a class, but don't feel like this is something that should be a part of your final project because it probably shouldn't be. Well, I mean, it'd be great if it was, but I don't think that's particularly realistic. So what the heck is AJAX? All right, so AJAX is a term that goes back to the early mid-2000s. AJAX has roots in just disrupting what we think of as a traditional client-server relationship on the internet. And so I say that because it stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML, right? So XML is a platform-independent format of data. Like if you got something in an XML format, you can open it up in just about any environment. That's what XML is all about. Once upon a time, they realized that there was so much data and they wanted to create a standardized format, and XML was that. XML is a markup language. It looks a lot like HTML. It's this idea you got tags, but the tags are created by whatever. Like it's not bound by the constraints of H1s and H2s and divs. You can create your own tags, your own structure. You don't need to know how to make XML, but that's what XML is. And so when you see the X in AJAX, it's a reference to XML, but also understand most people don't, or most information that you're probably going to be fetching via AJAX calls is probably not going to be XML. It could be JSON, which is a very common format. It could be CSV, comma separated values. It could be in any kind of a format. Just when they started this and they gave it a name, XML was the underlying thing. So AJAX is not a programming language. It's an idea. It's a group of technologies that work together to do something. Those things that you might do are like basically, so in a traditional client-server relationship, you got a client, your user. They say, hey, I want a web page, so they make a request of a host, and the host sends them that page, and then the connection's closed. That's the end of it. AJAX is, I'm a client, I want a web page. I request that web page from the server sends me that web page, but we may maintain an open connection to exchange information. So I could either, keep downloading things without reloading the page, or I could be sending information in the background. So that's what AJAX is. Like I said, it disrupts the traditional model of what a client-server relationship is on the internet because it allows us to exchange information behind the scenes. Now, a lot of what we're doing and some of the examples this week, it won't be clear that this is any different than anything else we've ever done, but eventually you'll get an appreciation of what you can do with this. And you don't need to do this, clearly. I can't think of any context where you need AJAX. AJAX is more of something that it's cool. Like when it's there, you'll appreciate it almost certainly. Your users will be like, "Oh, that's neat. Thank you. I like that." But it's not something that you need usually. It's more of a cool thing that you can do. You could do the traditional client-server relationship. You know this because you've done all kinds of things right like that. If you want to interact with the server, you get a full new web page. But with AJAX, we can do other things. How does AJAX work? All right, so I got this from w3schools.com. Here's a graphic, right? So I don't know what I have to say about this because the next probably 10 slides are all about this. But basically, there's this idea that someone, the user, initiates some kind of event on a web page, like clicking on a button, and then a request is created. A request gets sent to the server. Server processes the request. Server sends back the response. Response is read by JavaScript, and then the page is updated. This all sounds kind of like what normally JavaScript. I don't know. I'm trying to think. It's hard to come up with an analogy for this. This is kind of the normal role of JavaScript is to update the contents of the page. The difference is rather than updating it with some file or some variables or something that's sitting locally on your computer or on the web page, you're going to be fetching stuff from a server in the background. And so this is, get ready for the gruesome details. And you don't need to take notes on this and don't follow along. I'm just showing you this next part. So the first thing is creating that request object. And so this is what it would look like in JavaScript if you were going to do these things manually, but you're not going to do them manually. So just appreciate that all this is going to be handled for you through jQuery. So the first thing you do is you set up that tool to maintain this connection. And here you see this. This is old, but it doesn't matter because it's kind of the point. You see this is what it would look like to create that tool for the AJAX request in these browsers. But if you have an old browser, old version of Internet Explorer, different syntax, right? This is very representative of one of the purposes of jQuery, which is to standardize these things. If you're going to do a good job of writing JavaScript, oftentimes or sometimes you need to write like if-else's and kind of check what browser they're using and send them the appropriate tool. But one of the things that jQuery does is it has these if-else's built into it, and so it's going to handle the initialization of the request and figure out what the right tool is for you. All right, so once you've created the tool, then you open up the connection. Now, you're not going to do this, so don't worry about it, but there's an open, there's a send. Then we get to this part, on ready state change. So this is stuff that you generally don't care about, but it's just kind of how the World Wide Web works. When you are making a request of a server, there are different states ranging from request hasn't even been initialized to, okay, right, we've established a connection. That request has been received, the request is being processed, and then state 4 being, all right, the server did its job and it's ready to send the response, right? So it starts out, hey, I haven't even heard what the request is. This is all the middle steps, and then this is I've completed the task. And so those are ready states, and they change. Now, as far as you're concerned, you really only care about 0 and 4. If something, the 1, 2, 3, those are intermediate steps that you're not going to need to be concerned with, but step 4 or part 4 is the part where you're ready to get your data back, which is the one you care about. So that is something that gets monitored, needs to be monitored. Status, all right, so those are ready states. There's also status codes. You know about status codes, whether you think about them or not. Good old-fashioned 404 error, which we've all seen that one. That means page not found. So this is communication sent via headers using the internet about the status of a page. 200 is one you don't care about. 200 means good. 200 means, all right, good, we got it. 404 means I can't find the thing you're looking for. There's other status codes. You've surely seen some of them. So that's actually stuff that you do need to deal with in the world of AJAX. But you should be thankful that you don't actually have to worry about those things, because those are the things that will get taken care of for you. All right, and then so at the point where the requests have been processed and you've been sent back the resource that you need, well, then you need to decide, what did I just get back, right? Like, is the thing I got back a string? Is it XML? As you'll see, since we're going to be using JSON for jQuery for this, sometimes that thing you'll get back will be JSON. So you got to know what kind of data are you expecting back? What's the format look like? It could be all kinds of things. Here's an example of what this would look like in JavaScript, but you're not going to need to do this, right? So here's that requesting object. So on ready state change, remember there was 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Every time one of those things happen, there's some communication going on between the client and server. We're saying when the state is 4, which means everything's done on the server and everything's finished, right? And we got it back the way we want it. So work's done. We received what we wanted to receive. Then we do our work. There's a bunch of housekeeping that goes on behind the scenes, and I'm just trying to show you that this is complicated, but you're not going to need to actually do this. In the past, I have had classes do this. I don't particularly find it to be worthwhile. I do not mind dragging you through the details of how things happen because it helps you to build an understanding, but this is one of those times where I think it's unnecessarily complex. And this down here would be taking, right, the thing you're getting is XML, I can tell by looking at that, and here's, right, working with XML is a pain, so that's kind of what that looks like. So that's how it would work, but you're going to be using jQuery, so things are going to be easier. So I don't need you to really explain what just happened. I do need you to understand that the client-server interaction is complicated, and if that would be sufficient, I think. All right, so jQuery makes AJAX relatively easy. It doesn't make it easy. It's still complicated what you're doing, but all that housekeeping, all those establishing connections and monitoring those states and seeing how things are going, that's all going to get handled for you. Most people do use jQuery for AJAX calls. Like if you want proof, go to Stack Exchange and do, I don't know, Google some kind of question about AJAX. I can almost guarantee you that your response is going to have dollar signs in it, which is just implying that people use jQuery for it. All that stuff I just talked about, you would have to write that if you're not using, well, I mean, you could use some kind of a JavaScript library, but why not use a library called jQuery, which is good at this. All right, and as I've mentioned a few times already, if you're going to be doing AJAX calls, it's okay to use jQuery for those. jQuery is not, it has a cost in terms of bandwidth, and it's a resource that you have to load, but it's worth loading for an AJAX call, I'd say. All right, I just made this up. I don't know why, but it's not called jQuax, but I don't know. I didn't want to call this slide jQuery and AJAX, so I just put them both together and made some word. No one uses that term. Don't use that term. I'm not trying to make that even a real term. It's just I was feeling like goofball when I wrote it. So using jQuery, AJAX is going to be relatively simple. You just need to decide what you want to do with it. And so on the next page, I'll show you 3 functions that you can use. We're only going to use one of them in the demonstrations today, and we'll use another one in the lab. And like I said, we're going to keep using AJAX and jQuery for the next few weeks. Well, actually not next week, but the week after that. So you're going to get some practice with these things. But for now, know you got 3 choices, and depending on what you want to do with the information, you'll make your choice based on that. These are the 3 choices. You got load, get, and get JSON. All of my examples are going to be load because load is the simplest, but it's also kind of limited in terms of what it can do. On the lab, you'll be using these guys, which are the more complicated ones. These guys are very much related. This is that, with the implication that the thing that you're receiving is going to be a JSON file. If that thing that you're receiving isn't JSON, like it's a XML or a CSV, then you'd want to use get for sure. And if that thing that you're getting is JSON, then, well, that's the one. So we're going to use these on the lab. I'm not going to talk about them a whole lot. My demonstrations are all going to be for load because load's the most simple one. And I think that'll help us to understand what in the heck we're trying to do. So the one you choose is going to be dependent on what you're doing with the data and what the data looks like, what kind of processing you want to apply to that data. So here's the 3, right? So load's the simplest one. Here's our syntax. So here's a selector. I say this as in, like, you know, usually when we say list, we're in the context of an each or like iterating over an array or, you know, an object-oriented paradigm. That's not going to be the case. That's going to be a selector for an ID on your page. I can't imagine it wouldn't be. But, you know, it's irrelevant what it is. It's a reference to something. That's probably going to be an ID. And then dot load, right? Isn't that cool? Remember all that stuff I just showed you about initializing the XHR or whatever that was called. I don't remember. You don't need to worry about it. All that stuff's going to get handled for you. Your ready states, your status codes. So this is the name of the script that you'd want to run. And so load means, so here's how this goes. What is this going to do? Well, I don't know, right? This could be a local file. It could be like a data file. It could be a PHP. It could be anything. There's no rules about what this is. This could be a remote resource sitting on a server somewhere. But what this does is it calls that script, and whatever this is going to get updated with whatever this thing returns. Now, yeah, I'll do 3 different examples returning quite different sets of results. So you'll see that this is, I can't tell you what that is. It's some resource somewhere. This just means that I want to take the results I get and put them in this thing. This is the easiest one to do. It's kind of limited in terms of what it can do, but that's what I'm going to use a lot of. Get and get JSON. These are ones that you're going to use in the lab this week. The lab is way more complicated than any of these examples that I'm going to show you. But it's just a different task. So, but it's a lab. It's going to be a solution. That'll give you your hands on with that. The difference between these and these is, so it starts off similar enough. You'll notice that you don't call them from a thing. It's just $ and dot, right? So that's the first time I think that you've seen that without a selector, because it's not used. We're not like putting an event on something, or we're not updating a thing. This just means, hey, I want something that's part of the jQuery library. So you got get JSON. I'm going to talk about them as being the same thing because they are kind of in purpose the same thing. They just, one of them is for working with JSON and one's not. Right? You're calling this or you're calling this. This is the name of the script, right? So far so similar, but the difference is here you got this function call. And then you got this thing called data, which is tricky. You'll just need to see some examples of how that works. So name of the script, and then you're going to get something back from this. This is going to return text. It's going to return, I don't know what it's going to return. It's going to return something that you're going to process in JavaScript. And that processing that thing in JavaScript is going to be what's going to be in here. And so let's just say that this just generates a string called hello world. Then that thing called hello world is going to be data. So it's going to be your job in reality to this, more often than not, this is going to be a complex object, and you're going to have to iterate over it inside of here. That's just how that's going to work. You'll see there's a lab. All right, and I think that's all I can do for that. Data formats, I've talked about this a little bit. So JSON, we will get into JSON. Trust me, you'll get some JSON examples. You'll get plenty of them when we get to external data sources, because you'll see when you start fetching big data from the real internet, it's usually in JSON format, but that's not always true. I will try and find you some CSV and some XML. I actually can't make any guarantees, because those people that provide that data on the internet, those things, they go down. Like every year I go back to one of my things that I always like to illustrate for this class, and I realize that they've taken it down or they've changed the format of the data. So I'm not making any promises about what you will see, but I'm sure you'll see some JSON, and I think I can probably try and find some examples of those things. Oftentimes you have the choice of grabbing XML if you want it. All right, so we're going to look at 3 examples today. One of them is going to be, 2 of them are going to be canned. This one's not going to be canned. This one is a silly example. It's the easiest thing I can do. I encourage you to play along from home, but it's not that interesting. So here's example 1. So I've got this form. I guess let me show you how it works. Doesn't do anything. Not that. I meant inspect element. I'm going to go through these as quick as I can, because it'd be nice to not have a super long lecture. Nothing does anything. You see it. All right. So I've got my link to the jQuery library. I've got my open and closing script tags. I've got my document ready. This is an appropriate place to do some things. So I'm just going to do a plain Jane load, like I said, and we'll see how that goes. All right. So how this works is I need a selector. So where do I want to put these results? I'm going to put these results in this my div thing. So if I want to select something with an ID of my div, it's going to be # or hashtag, because it's ID. All right, so that's the thing that I want to update. I'll go load. Remember, load is the easiest one. That looks gray. What did I do wrong? Oh yeah, I did that wrong. All right, load, and then load's pretty simple. Load, you just what's the name of the thing you want? All right, the name of the thing I want is actually going to be hello. See this hello.txt? That's the file. It could be PHP, it could HTML, it doesn't matter. File extension doesn't really matter. Well, I guess it could matter, but it just in terms of like what happens on this file, but this doesn't care what it is. So I'll say hello.html, right? Or no, yep, that text. Actually, let's do HTML because that won't work, and then you'll see how that works, I guess, maybe, I think. All right, so that's my AJAX call. Now this is weird because this is just a string. Now, really, fine, I'll just do it and we'll talk later. All right. So cross-origin request blocked. All right, so that's the first thing we need to talk about here. So one thing you might notice is my path. See, I'm working on my htdocs folder. Well, if all we're doing is JavaScript, you don't need to be out of your htdocs folder, but I'm telling you that is the fix here. This actually does need to be in your htdocs folder, and you do need to be running XAMPP, because I go localhost, and you know I don't have any PHP which needs to be processed, but that clears up that. So I don't know a good way to explain that, but long story short, I guess something like if you're going to be doing an AJAX call, you need to run this through localhost. And so even though that's a static file that doesn't do anything, man, that really doesn't do anything, does it? Why is it not? Oh, okay, so, all right, so what the heck's going on here? What's not going on here? Nothing's happening at all, right? Like, what is this? Nothing. Now, so the problem is there's no such thing as hello.html. There's something called hello.txt. Now, I think it's interesting to note that that didn't throw any errors, which is weird, but we're learning how this works. And you see how that worked. So if it didn't find the file, that didn't give me anything to work with. So what that tells you is that's going to be a difficult situation to debug. Now, you're like, what in the heck? Why would you do that, right? Why not just do a PHP require here? Because that's all that's doing is loading some static text. Well, you could have. Why not just create a variable and set it to hello world and just display it there with JavaScript? Well, you certainly could have. I'm just telling you this is an overly simple example. Normally, this is going to be more complex than this. Normally, this is going to be like a file that you have to read through, or there's going to be some logic going on in there. Now, to make this thing a little bit more interesting, I'm gonna attach this to an event that might help you here. So let's say that I want to execute this, and another reason this is a bad demonstration is that that happened on page load essentially. So there was nothing dynamic about it. But if I want to attach an event to one of those buttons, so here I've got a button with an ID of my butt. I do that every time. You know, I call it my div, my h1. How can I not call it my butt? Click. So when you click on my butt, anonymous function call, open curly brace, enter, closing curly brace, closing parentheses, semicolon. I'm just going to do this. I'm just taking that thing I wrote earlier, and I'm attaching an event to it. And so now you can see it happen, but still, this isn't different than anything that you could do with just in plain old JavaScript, right? I mean, all I'm doing is manipulating the inner HTML, right? Like I could do this in pure JavaScript, but trust me, don't mistake this for being a bad example just because it's simple, right? So now it's doing it when I tell it to do it. Now I'm going to use that other button too. And since it's going to be so similar, I'm going to copy paste. So let's say my butt 2. When you click on that, I'm going to load the thing called AJAX. That's a reference to that file, AJAX rocks. So depending on the button you click, I'm going to update the contents of a div dynamically. Now, I'll say it one more time. Last time I planned to say this is essentially all I'm doing is putting click events on these buttons, and I'm changing the inner HTML of this. That is something, I don't need AJAX to do this. I just am using AJAX to do this because it's the simplest example I can come up with. All right, so you see, kind of sort of what's happening. It's static information, so you're not getting any benefit out of AJAX, but that's the simplest AJAX example that I can show you. Like I said, I didn't give you that data file because you could make this form super easy, and these files even easier. All right, so next up, let's look at a database request. So this is a more functional example. So let's say I want to do, well, that's not an example, but so one of the cool things you can do is a database request. Now, when you're talking big data, like say you want to pull something from the Google Maps data, I want to say database, but if you're interfacing with a database, it's going to be your database. If you're interfacing with, generally speaking, with big data, you're going to use what's called an API to access that, and that's what's on the, ultimately on our to-do list. But this week we're going to keep our calls local to our own database. So here's a simple and functional example that you might want to use on your website projects that you use. It's easy enough to add. This is really the only application of AJAX that I think you might realistically use on any of your own work that you do in this class. You don't have to, but you'll see it's kind of cool. So, when you're registering for a site and you got an email address or a username, and sometimes they're taken, sometimes they're not, but you have to wait to press submit to figure it out. Well, if you're just providing feedback after they submit, that'd be good. Really, that's really not bad. But let's give those users some real-time feedback. So let's figure out, so say we got usernames, and we want to let the user know if they're going to be good ahead of time or not. And I also, at this point, I realize I just switched my examples. So this is tied to a table that you don't have. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to show you how to import and export a table. So I'm giving you the table so you can do this one along with me if you want. So let me show you how that works. So I'm going to crack open my console. I'm going to click admin. That's going to pop open my console here. All right, so now I'm sitting here at my management console. So I gave you a file, headers.sql. So you need to download that. It's listed in the description for this video. And if you want to import a table, how it goes is you click on the database. You got import, you got export. Now, from what I recall, you might all be running different versions of PHP It's tied to your XAMPP installation. Mine's old because I installed this years ago. You might have to look around to find import and export. It might be the same button. You might have to go on a bit of a scavenger hunt. I'm just telling you, I think you might. So what you would do is you got that SQL file. I'm going to go import, browse, go find that file. Yeah, I have a folder called JS crap. I just do. Here's headers. I go open. Now there's stuff about the encoding and the character set. That stuff does matter. I think in this instance you're going to be okay. I've never seen one for myself actually because I don't do a ton of this where I actually have to dig into these things, but I'm just going to do all defaults. I go. And now I got a table called headers with like 1,000 rows, which is cool because, how well can I illustrate available and unavailable usernames if there's only like 3 of them, So that's how you back something up. Let me show you how to make a copy out of something. So let's say you got something that you want to copy or that you want to back up. To back it up, you would go export and then you just give it a name, like headers. That's what I did. That's how I made that. So you see how easy it is to make that SQL file? And that SQL file is just a giant, create the table and do all the inserts. So it's that easy to back up a table or export a table, and it's that easy to import a table. So if you're following along, you should do that so you can follow along, so you can now know what I'm talking about. All right, so we got this table. I just showed you how to update a table. And so you see this table of usernames? That's what I'm going to be looking at. Lance Berkman is like my hero, and he just happens to be the first. He's not actually my favorite baseball player of all time, but he's the man. So I like that he's my first one. And I'm just gonna when I write my queries, I'm gonna use Lance Berkman's name because it works more interestingly if I can find a username that is unavailable. So I'm going Lance Berkman. All right. So example 2 looks like this. So we got a username, I got a password. I'm not going to deal with submitting the form. I don't care about the password. I'm just going to look at that username, and depending on whether it's available or not, I'm going to use this this little span right here to say, hey, it's good or it's bad. And there's a button and such. So here I go. So I've got my jQuery library, document ready. So here I am attaching a Keyup event to the uname field. Keyup is probably what you want to do if you want to update the results every time a user types a character. I always think of this as being analogous to like a Google search. You know, if you type like CA, you're going to get like all these suggested results like category, caterpillar. And then as you add a letter, that search keeps getting more specific. You could do .change. I don't care what you do, but Keyup I think is what you actually want. Probably. All right, so I'm saying when you key up on uname, I'm going to create a variable which gets the value of the thing that you typed in uname. I don't need to do this, but right, that's my general philosophy is that when you're doing some gnarly concatenation, I'd rather just do it in 2 separate lines. So get the value every time they press a key, and then that span, I want to update the contents of that span, so load, and this is the file that I'm calling. So this is more interesting than the previous one. You remember how the other one I just did hello? Here I'm calling something called searchuname.php. And since you already know PHP, you know what it looks like to pass key value pairs. So what that means is I'm passing stuff via the get. I'm going to be able to retrieve this in the super global called $_get. So question mark means here's the data, and then this is a key value pair, something called uname, and the value is uname, which is that thing. So notice I'm passing something in that file. And the file looks like this. There's a connection. You can see I'm using MySQLi as opposed to PDO. If you want to use PDO, go ahead, but you got to make a choice about what you're going to use. There I get the uname. Here I say if that uname is less than 3 characters, then I'm going to echo. Username must be at least 3 characters. And so to be clear, remember in these previous ones, there was no echoes, there was no ifs. That was just text, which was going to be displayed. In this world, this is not going to be displayed. The only things that are going to be displayed is that stuff that is echoed. And you know that about echoes. That's not news to you. You know if you don't echo something, it's not going to get communicated to the browser. So here, there's logic and processing and database connections going on. And we are... but the only thing the user is going to see is this. So at some point, if the username's not long enough, we're going to yell at them. Otherwise, we're going to do a query. Select star from headers where uname like or equals that. There we process or we send it through, and then here we have an if else. So what this means is so we're going to fetch. So we're trying to fetch a row. If there is a row, then that means that the name is already taken and therefore it's not available. If there is no row returned, then that means that the username is available. So there's 3 sets of feedback. One is type some more characters. One is it's available. One is it's not available. Notice there's echoes here. Far more complex script that we're calling, but we're also going to get some mileage out of this. It's going to do something cool for us as opposed to the last one, which was not doing anything cool for us. All right, so here I am. I'm going to crack open that console. And so I write a not long enough, not long enough, not long enough, right? And you see how that works? See how I'm getting real-time feedback? And if I go Lance Berkman, that username is not available, but L Berkman 2 is. And you can see how you can use this to help your users with unique fields, which is interesting because I showed you how to handle that with try catches and unique constraints. But you know that was kind of painful, right? Like, isn't it better to let them know up front that there's a problem than yell at them afterwards? I think you're setting them up for failure. Whereas here, you can see how this works. It's pretty cool. Bill Hall, not available. I know that Bill Hall was like number 2 or something. It's weird when I look at this data because I know like everything about me. I know who every one of these guys are, you know, so it's easy for me to remember who they are. But you can see it's working, and that's pretty cool, right? Like that's neat. So that's a cooler application of AJAX. And then the last one, I debated what to do with this exactly. Here, let me show you the prompt first. You've seen it. I want to display search results as the user is entering a search term, like a Google search, you know, like I'm talking about that drop-down menu that suggests what you might be looking for. This is pretty cool. I really like this. But it's also, I don't know, it's bells and whistles, right? It's not necessary to how the site functions. All right. So we got player name, field's called name, document ready. There's my link to jQuery. Here's, right, that's necessary. So I'm saying when you key up on the name field, so it's very similar to the previous one, except it's a name instead of a uname. I'm going to get that name, right? So here's, and, you know, there's going to be some concatenation. And what I want to do, I've got this div and I want to update it. Loads appropriate for updating the contents of a thing. With a call to search player.php, I'm going to pass a key value pair, name equals name. Now, the interesting thing is what this file looks like. It's both interesting and not interesting because this is just stuff you've done. This isn't even difficult in terms of what I've asked you to do before. It's just you're doing it in a different context. Rather than doing it on the web page when it loads, we're doing it as events happen on an existing web page. So it's a good example of ongoing communication behind the scenes on a page that's already loaded. So here's my connect script. Here's where I get the thing. Here's my SQL. Select star from headers where you name like, whatever, right? And so I also want to remind you that if you're doing PDO here, do you remember how likes were different? All right. So if you're doing that, it's fine. I think it's good, but your query is going to be structured differently. So I'm saying if there's more than 0 rows, which is what MySQL num rows would, right? If you come up empty, this is going to be 0. It's going to evaluate to false. It's going to say no results. Otherwise, I want to do the old standard, which is iterate through that set. So you've seen this before. It's been a while since we did it, but you know, right? So you got let's just say you have 100 rows or something, like you type the letter A or something. This is that while loop, and so we're creating a local variable row, which is set to whatever you get when you fetch a row. So if there's 1 row, it's going to run 1 time. If there's 100 times, it's going to run 100 times. Here's my big echo. So echo name hyphen position. Now, what I kind of debated with here was making that into a table, but you have iterated through a set of results and made a table many times. I just did the vanilla thing, which is just really not formatting it like a table and just formatting it as text with line breaks, because I wanted this to be a shorter video. I think shorter's good because I'm thinking you're probably going to maybe rewatch these examples twice. And so I think that'd be cool if I could give you my lecture and you could watch the examples 2 or 3 times in the time I could take to do a longer video. But, you know, it would be great to format this as a table, but I'm not formatting it as a table. All right, just to be clear about that. So let's see how this works. Localhost, and I type an A, and you see, that's cool, right? Like that's everyone with an A in their name. But 2 A's, you're gonna get a few. You type 3 A's, I'm genuinely interested if anyone actually has 3 consecutive A's in their name. Like in the whole world, I don't know, you probably do, but you can see no results, right? And so, yes, I'm just doing this as plain text, but you could make this into a table pretty easily, and making it into a table would be the appropriate thing to do. And just in the world of theory, you could make each one of these things into a link to a details page pretty easily. Those are all things you know how to do. And when easily, I don't know if that's the right word, but they're well within the realm of things that I think you could do. All right, so that's my 3 examples. Each one, I don't know, these last 2 were the 2 more interesting ones, but those are good examples of AJAX. So notice that all we did here was load. In the lab, you'll be using these ones where you do more complex stuff. So this is going to be where this thing returns like a data set, and you are going to use JavaScript to process the data set. And so we'll be doing some of that in the lab this week. So now you have a working knowledge of how to get started with AJAX calls. If you're not completely sure what the value is or why you would use them, that's okay at this point. We're going to practice more in the lab. We're going to practice more with this in the next, not necessarily next week, but the week after that. So this isn't going to go away, and you'll get more looks at it by the time it's all said and done. Thanks for watching.